you decide to go off on them when you really need to go back and finish the sequence. So what I want to do is take us back to the place where I got a little bit ahead of myself. And then I think, just around the time when all of you started to lose what I was saying, and you thought, what is this saying? Right around that part, that's where I want to go back. So I'm sure, by just putting in a few foundation stones, I'll be able to get you to where the point where you thought you were losing his mind. You remember we had this little picture, right? We had the picture of the boxes and whether or not there were things in the boxes. So one thought, like, saying, I know I've got something in my box, but how do you know? And the issue, the thought being that there's sometimes, or some thought we have, that there's something, mental, typically mental, that's crucial to our being right rather than wrong, being on one side of an important divide rather than another. And so that was the easy part, the part of which I think it was all perfectly coherent and followable. But then what I did was I said, yeah, but it's not like that with the case of love because you can doubt your own law. And that's where I made the mistake. I should have taken 2 steps instead of 1. Because, of course, in many cases, the picture we have of love is precisely of having something in the box. So take the issue that comes up in the symposium between the lover and the non-lover. So here's a question you can ask, right? How does the non-lover know he doesn't love? And how does the lover know he does? So we tell ourselves a story about love. In fact, last night I watched Stunning, thing, which all of you should watch. There's the Monteverdi's The Coronation of Pompeii. It's an extraordinary opera, but it's about the 3 sort of divine presences: love, which conquers everything; fortune, which also has control; and virtue, which doesn't seem to get much track in the world. Oh, it's a brilliant exploration of this. So here's the thought, right? We tell ourselves a story about love. So here's the love case, and here's the non-love. And we say, well, this is where Cupid's arrow comes. That's the story in Monteverdi, right? And you're stuck. That's it. It's like that. And we have a bunch of lingo that we tell ourselves about it, which isn't really improving that picture very much. Chemistry, a something, right? And there's got to be some truth to that story, it seems to me. And one of the reasons that I think we know there's some truth to something like this is that when we look at our animal kindred, we see a phenomenon that is like this. So suppose we're thinking for a moment as follows. We really should be, if we were anthropologists of ourselves, looking at human beings and other animals, we would think, all these mammals have these funny mating behaviors. The blue-footed booby the male holds up a little blue foot. The bowerbird makes a little bower. The peacock has those big feathers. Well, it's really interesting. They do a little dance, something happens. And what do these hairless, featherless bipeds do, these humans? Well, they do this thing, right? And then we describe the mating habits of human beings. And clearly that's a very studyable phenomenon, right? So if we're thinking about it this way, we're thinking, well, if we want an explanation of what that is, it's very much like giving an explanation of why we're so hooked on sugar, salt, and fat. It's something to be explained not directly by our psychology, but something much more primitive than that, to be explained by our bonding, the bonding of small creatures with their caregivers. So the little ducks follow after whatever is the first big object that comes into their thing. It's not to be explained by directly by our psychology, as well as to be explained as by sub-psychological, biological phenomena that have to do with the explanation of our bonding with other beings, parents especially, and them with us, and then our bonding with other mates for the purposes of reproduction. So if we were thinking of it that way, we would think, well, that kind of explosive sense of focus, or the heart beating fast, or the sense that the person of that, wow, I'm in love, or all of the phenomenology that goes along with this, I think, oh, well, this is like what happens when the female booby sees the blue feet that she really likes, and her little heart starts to throb and she gets ready to mate, right? Well, it's not, we should think of it, well, it's on that scale somewhere. And then what we think is, well, that can be missing, right? It can be replaced by all kinds of other things. For example, one of the things it could be replaced by is just a desire for sexual intercourse, right? Where we're not thinking, now we know how it is we reproduce. We know what kind of a role our reproductive desire plays in us. We know all of that, and we also know how to ensure that we don't reproduce when we do the things that are normally reproductive. And so it can be that, right, I'm thinking, yeah, this is what this leads me to do. It leads me to want to have sexual intercourse. But that's what I want. I don't want the follow-on part of it, and I know how to prevent the follow-on part of it from occurring. So it can be that. It can be a different one altogether, where it's not a sexual desire at all that's playing the role. So when people say, falsely I believe, but I don't want to discuss it because it's complicated, rape is a crime of violence, not a sexual crime, as if those are two exclusive alternatives. I think what they're thinking, and what's right, is that our reasons for having sex with another person need not themselves be sexual reasons. It needn't be that I want to have sex with you because I sexually desire you. That's obvious in the case where I'm willing to have sex with you because I see you sexually desire me. And yes, I like you and want to give you what you want, but it can just be that I want to dominate you, I want to use you for certain purposes, get all kinds of complicated reasons. Come in, I think you'd make a good trophy wife. I think I think you would add to my prestige and power. I think I'd take you away from somebody else and that would give me pleasure. There are millions of reasons why we might think, oh, of course I don't love you. That could be the non-lover, right? But I'm willing to go through a whole set of love-like behaviors because there are other reasons, other things that I want. So, but the thought I want to hold on to is that when we understand our love lives as in part rooted in our biology, not directly in our psychology, we get an explanation for the presence, so to speak, of the little black dot in the box. This is an urge in us to drive us towards, to do something, regardless of our own plans for our lives. It works just like our hunger and other things work. It works to drive us towards a certain thing without necessarily our having to sign on to them. Right? That's the whole point of having a sexual drive of this sort, is to get copies of you into the next generation, regardless of what you want to do. Right? It's not about that, about what you want or what you're aiming at in your life. It's about what this is urging you to do. So that's the thought I had, wanted to hold on to about the presence of the box. Then I zipped over to the thought of, which is a different thought, that you might doubt the presence of this. You might doubt the presence of something. You might not know whether you love or not. That's a different question. And it comes in at a later stage in the story. Okay, so that's the part where the story got a bit derailed. Now I want to re-rail it in, I think, a better way. So I started to tell you a story about what it would be for you not to doubt your love, for you to have a love that wouldn't lead you to doubt it. And I talked about the growing up of this thing, right? So I've said, well, you have to tell some kind of developmental story in order to be able to explain something that we could put into the sort of frame of whatever is going on with me and you. It's not this. that it might be love, but I doubt it. I'm not confident about my own loving capacities or my own lovability or something like that. So we want to be able to talk about maturity and growth and ways in which it can fail to happen. So in our case, unlike with many other animals, our developmental story has a layer of added complexity to it. So we have to start with, right, in childhood, an urge that's probably in the same category, which is our bonding with our caregivers. We don't bond with them because we think it's a good idea, or because we have a plan, or all of this happens before that. And probably their bonding with us is not best understood by their having a plan either. It's rather that we're wired up in certain kinds of ways by our biology to respond in certain ways to small children and babies. We all bring a baby into the room and see what happens, right? Everybody's like this, right? Exactly. Yeah, and they go, and everybody goes. And you know, we watch it a million times. You think, how can grown-ups find this amusing? It can't be, right? But they do, and it's okay. So, but that's in part, right? What we're thinking is it's very hard to resist doing that. So, for example, you can try it. You know, so baby smiles at you. Try doing this. Right? You have to work out, and the babies get freaked out. And probably later they have massive psychological damage, which you've done just by this one thing. So we want to think here about this thing as, so now we need to think about the infant version. And then we want to think about its having trajectories. How is that going to develop, right? And so, of course, it typically does, right? The mode of interaction with caregivers that you have when you're a neonate is quite different than the one you have when you're a toddler, and then it develops, right? And if it doesn't develop, or it develops in some weird way, there are problems. We know it when we talk about, you know, childhood development. We have ideas about norms of growth and development and change. We think of parents who are preventing this kind of thing from happening, or enabling it, or causing it to go in one way rather than another. And it's not, we can think of very simple examples, and then it gets complicated, of course. So we've got trajectories. Then in our case, and now I'm going to just use this box for a different purpose. Love later. So somewhere in here around puberty, a new set of things enter the picture. And we are aware of it. We understand quite a lot about the biology of it. There are these sort of hormone showers. There's especially in males, there's a kind of new sort of almost monopolistic focus on sexual matters that wasn't there before. So if you read St. Augustine, right, about talking about his childhood, he talks about this moment at which, you know, suddenly from the light, pure, happy, everything is guilt-free and easy, to the sudden emergence into something where everything is fraught, guilty, dirty, somehow, right? That whole set of things that we're all pretty familiar with. And then that's the sort of overt sexualizing of this. It's been there before, but in a different form. So when Freud talks about it, he says, well, there's infantile sexuality. It's not as if it changes kind. It's rather that it's of a certain sort. Then there's a kind of latency period where that's put behind. Then there's a flowering of it into puberty. Well, we don't have to believe that story, but some story like that has got to be a reasonable one for us to tell, right? We've got to be able to tell some kind of story about this. And then some kind of story, if you like, of normal, happy-making, good, proper, whatever you want to call it, trajectories, and somehow or other bad, trajectories or other kinds of trajectories, things that can go right and can go wrong in these. Every time there's development, there's the possibility of it's going right or going wrong. So with this notion with trajectories, we got right and wrong. And if you don't like this terminology, call them plus and minus. I don't care what you call them. And we have thoughts about what we're thinking about when we think about plus or minus or good or bad. And one of the thoughts I think that we have is about how to integrate this into an overall successful life. You were thinking about what is it to absorb your sexual desires into a life of which they're a part and in which they're a good part. That is, you're glad you've got them, so to speak, right? And they contribute to your welfare and happiness. So when we go up to these trajectories of right and wrong, we're thinking of successful, fulfilling, life. And about the integration of what started there into that life. So it's easy if we tell stories about how it's very difficult to integrate. Right? So a successful and fulfilling life, right, is one that occurs within a larger social world. And so we can think of ways in which, right, that very fact that your life has to be integrated into a larger social world can have as a consequence that how this has developed can make it difficult. So think of when it was illegal to be homosexual. Well, having homosexual desires made it extremely difficult to integrate yourself into the social world because to reveal it meant you were going to be criminalized. Now, that's an obvious example. But of course, there are far more subtle examples where it's not about integrating yourself into the larger social world that the problem comes, but actually just integrating this into any successful life, right? So the problem just may be how to get it into a box that could be called anything like a successful life. So let's take a kind of example, and again, just a kind of toy example to make it clearer. Now suppose, for example, that because of the way this has developed in you, you now can only, you're attracted to people who will abuse you. So because of the way that desire has, that little box has developed, you find yourself attracted to people who treat you like shit. And even though you don't fully understand, you don't think that. You're not thinking, oh, here's another one who'll treat me like shit, right? That's not the way you think of it. It's rather that that's what happens. You find yourself in one relationship after another where in the end you're always on the bad side. So that desire can't be integrated into a successful life, right? Because the cost of fulfilling it will be to make the life not successful overall. And we can think of all kinds of examples like that. In the same way, of course, we weren't talking about sexual. This could be that you're an alcoholic. You've got an alcoholism gene, and when you try to integrate your urge to drink into a successful life, you can't do it because the urge is going to lead you to drink yourself into an unsuccessful life. So there are all kinds of things besides our love lives that make it very difficult to integrate, but that's obviously one. So we can find and then what we have to do, if that's the case, if we find that we can't integrate it into a successful life, we have to backtrack and start to think about how to do it. Now what I want to suggest we get in the symposium, and especially in the Phaedrus, we get a picture of what successful integration amounts to. So the story in a nutshell is, if you're if this, so you start with good enough parents, so they don't harm this enough, so that there's nothing that can be done with it. Nature does a reasonably good job, so you start with pretty good odds. And then it develops, and now this is the way Plato wants to put it. He says, well, there are three ways that all are successful, but some are more successful than others. And these are determined in part by the nature of the psychology into which we're trying to integrate our sexual desire. So now we want to go back and ask, not about the dot, but about the box. And we're going to call this the psychology box. With such great originality, though, I'm not sure. The psychology box, right? What do we put in there? Well, on Plato's view, right, in Symposium, Phaedrus, Republic, gets three kinds of desires. In the Phaedrus, we get the most famous example, the horse, the black horse, the white horse, and the charioteer, right? In the Republic, it's the appetites, the spirited desires, and the rational desires, and you don't get that fully developed as such in the Symposium, but it's presupposed by the different kinds of begetting and beauty. There's appetitive begetting and beauty, which results in little babies. There are spirited ones where what you want to do is achieve honor and then produce a social world and an ongoing social world in which those kinds of things will be valued. And then the rational ones where you want to understand the world and you want to love your partner in the clear light of understanding yourself and the world. There's kind of a maximal transparency to the loving that you're doing. So if we have the psychology boxes like that, we've got appetite, spirit or the desire for love, affection, and the approval of others, and reason. And these are all desires. These are all the things that are in the motivational style. So I've got all of those. And now the question is, right, what kind of a person am I, given that these are the components of my psychology? Well, they can be integrated or ordered in different ways. Right? So suppose that, and this is what Plato talks about this in terms of rule or control. So in the charioteer, which is a nice one, right, who's going to run the show? Is it the black horse, appetite, that will pull any which way? Is it spirit, the white horse, or is it the charioteer that should run the show? And this is a matter of who's in control, who's running the chariot. In the case of the Republic, Plato does it in terms of psychic rule, which is ruling the thing. So when it's a good example is a misrule. So appetite says to reason, or is the way to put it, in ruling reason, it won't allow reason to calculate or look into anything other than how to make more money, how to be, if it's an honor, it'll be how to be successful. And it will restrict reason to doing those kinds of things and not to doing other kinds of things. So the thought is we've got three possibilities of three types. Appetitive, ruled by appetite, now I've got spirited in the obvious way, ruled by spirit, and the rational type, ruled by reason. And what we get in the Phaedrus, in the first part of the Phaedrus, is the different love styles of these three psychological types. How does an appetitive person go about loving? How does a spirited person go about loving? How does a rational person do it? And all of these, Plato's views, are, normal psychological types. These are all good enough psyches, just as, the city in which the appetitive person does well enough is a good enough city. It's not. That's not the thought. As if there's something wrong with you if you're one of these rather than the other. Each of these is thing that you may by nature end up being. So there's no, you couldn't have been one of the other things, even if you wanted to be. You end up being one or the other of these. The best one to end up is this, but it's not bad to end up this way, and it's not bad to end up this way either. It's just not as good. Right? And the issue is, how do these people go about loving? So we might tell ourselves a little story like this. So the appetitive person loves appetitively. That is, they think of the other person as something to be a satisfier of their desires, the desires in question being their sexual desires. So at a very crude level, you want a good sex partner, right? That's it, right? That's the thought you have. If I get this, this is going to be great. And you can imagine two happy Sybarites, right? Who each wants really good sex with the other. They each provide the other with it, and that's the base of their very happy relationship. They're not that interested in other features of each other. Yeah, they're there as long as they don't interfere with the good sexual life. It's okay, right? So they can have a successful life in the sense that, right, they would declare themselves to be pretty happy. We would judge them to be pretty happy. They're not massively frustrating their major goals and aims by the life they have. In fact, they're achieving them. What would be a failure would be for an appetitive person, someone who wants a really good sex life more than anything else, to get hitched to somebody who wants a life of approval, honor, and achievement more than they want a good sex life. So, you know, one wants to work an 18-hour day to make millions of bucks, comes home at night, is too tired to go to bed, loses libido, isn't interested. That's not a happy match. Right? And in the same way, we can imagine sort of two spirited people, right? Each involved in public service, each really interested in how well they're doing in their ratings, how popular they are. They like each other for those reasons. It's like a nice mirror. She likes him because he's successful. He likes her because she's successful. And the more successful they are, the more they like each other. Again, you can get a pretty good life that way. It's not as if that's just bound to fail, right? And then the rational ones, right, are the ones which in their loving put a very high premium on, well, things like understanding each other, seeing each other in the full round, understanding the world and their place in it, putting a high value on intellectual endeavors and so forth. And you can imagine, again, well, two people like this might be very happy together. I just saw sort of a picture of two philosophers, right? Each one thinks the other is doing really interesting work. They found it very exciting to read each other's work. They sit together at night looking at stuff together and thinking, wow, that's a great argument. All right, and this is the base of, now we don't want to think that the philosophers don't have sex, or the spirited people don't have sex, or that the appetitive people don't care about approval. We just want to see which is dominant, which is the one that matters to the feeling of success in the life, not, right, the exclusive one. So nobody who starves any part of their psyche is going to have a fully satisfied life. Right? There's going to be frustration and so forth. There isn't enough social approval, enough understanding, but it can be downplayed relative to the achievement of other goals. You with me? Yeah. So you see, there's a really nice way of looking at the thought. Is I think sometimes we think of it as we think of, oh, that love, that limerence, right? Where does it go? What happens to it? Why can't it disappear? I want to keep it. And I think the right thought is not that. It's the thought of, does it develop and grow in the right sort of way? Because the limerence is going to disappear no matter what. Well, that's a social norm. I mean, it has to. It just, the likelihoods are that after 2 years it won't be there. But that doesn't matter if it's been replaced by something that plays a similar sort of role in cementing and holding your relationship together and making it a good one. Right. If sex disappeared altogether, the relationship could be a really good one still, even provided that each party has found themselves in that position. So when Aristotle comes to think about these things in politics, He has ideas about what ages people should be when they marry, precisely with a view to the picture that, well, they should both become sort of low libido at around the same time. It would be a good idea if one was really still very desirous of sex and the other one wasn't. You need to think about those kinds of things in thinking about what happens when you marry. You have to be reasonable, so to speak, about projects. So that's the thought is, don't think limerence, which pulls us, this view that pulls us together, right? And that gets us into exploring a relationship, has to stay exactly the same kind of thing for the relationship to be successful. It depends a lot on which kind of relationship the limerence has disappeared in or appeared in. If it's really the thought that that's what I want, if you're an excitement junkie, right? If the thought is, no, only that, it's that buzz, that's what keeps me interested, then you're going to have a lot of short-term relationships, right? And the thought is, well, there'll be about 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and then you won't have that anymore, and you'll want to find it again. They can be, provided we're all on the same page, 2 partners or 3 partners or whatever is on the same page, this needn't be bad. The thought might be, no, we had a great relationship for 5 years, but hey, we knew it wouldn't last longer than that. Time to move on. We can still be friends, though, right? And there's nothing, that may be, in fact, success. And I could put it in a different way by saying that as our lives grow longer, our life expectancies grow longer, we have to do a massive set of reconceiving of what successful relationships are. Right? So suppose, for example, we're all, by and large, we're all dead by 35. And that was a reasonable life expectancy right up through the First World War. Suppose we're all dead at 35. Well, really, does it matter if our relationship would have bottomed out 35 years later? Or 10 years later? Of course it doesn't matter. Right? You might as well start worrying about this. Yeah, but I see that I really like to eat this diet, and I see that it'll be really good until I'm about 99 or so, but after that, there's a real downside to it. And, well, come on. What should I worry about that? If I'm only going to live to be 90, what would happen if I lived to be 99 can be very low priority. Well, we've done a very poor job of reconceiving romances and what love lives and successful ones are, now that we have much longer life expectancies. And by the way, also much earlier onset puberty. So on both dimensions. So, I mean, just think about some of the rules we have, laws we have. They're just preposterously stupid. Like age of consent to sexual activity. These just don't keep up with the biological facts in any interesting way. They're bound to be bad, right? We need to reconceive a whole set of things, and also about, if you like, what our love stories should be like. Right? So I could give you just one example of this. I mean, clearly we do need to see and have our eye educated to attractive aging bodies. Because one of those bodies, if we're lucky, is going to be ours for much longer than our early attractive body. If our eye is not educated to find beauty where we used not to find it because we didn't look there, we weren't taught how to see it, then we'll keep being attracted back to younger images of beauty when it's no longer good for us or integratable into our good, well-rounded life for that to be true. So, okay, so you're with me so far? Okay. Now I want to pull out, so now I've got you to the right place, in the sense, this is where I should have taken you last time. Then I did a little hop to what I think is the hard place. So let's look at this and think about how Plato, how everybody thinks about it. And perhaps it's still a very dominant way to think of reason. So Plato's thought, and you see this very much in the Republic, but you see it on the Symposium and the Phaedrus too. Plato has, and I want to introduce a little bit of terminology, Plato's notion of reason is closed. And what I mean by that is that we can, as it were, write the rules for reason. And what we do thereafter is follow the rules. So this would be as if you thought that the rules of theoretical rationality were the rules of, well, I don't know, pick your favorite logic, whatever one that is. Ideally, it should be provably complete and consistent. Let's suppose it is. And we think, okay, so that's what following those rules would make you theoretically or logically rational. And there are other ones at the practical level, whatever they are, that would be embodied, for example, in the virtues, in the moral rules, whatever they are. So the picture of reason, of the rational, is closed. I've given you a sort of sense of what closure is. But the thought is that there's something scriptable and safe and predictable and something that could be embodied in, for example, the ideal society. So if we look at the larger social world and we ask, as we were doing in the case of the symposium, what's an ideal social world? What's an ideal social world to do your loving in? Well, we know what non-ideal ones are, right? So if you are non-heteronormative in your sexual desires, you won't want to live in a whole set of contemporary societies, right? Because you won't be able to integrate, unless you're extremely lucky, you won't be able to integrate your love life into your social political life. You'll have to hide it, or deny it, or try to change it, or fake, or do something, but you won't be able to integrate it. So what would be an ideal one? Well, suppose you thought you knew, right? So, as many of us do, right? We think, oh, it's going to be a liberal democracy of some kind, some picture. So let's suppose that it is a liberal democracy, right? And so if that's so, and that's going to have repercussions for our psychological development. And why? Well, think of it this way. What will be good for us will be to develop so as to fit into a liberal democracy, right? So it might not be possible for us, but since that is the best one, it would be best if we could have a psychology that suited us to live in a liberal democracy. So we want to be I'll give you a little example. I said last time that there were styles of bringing up children. Well, I was brought up in one way, and the model when I was a child is children should be seen and not heard. Children weren't expected to have voices in adult conversations. They weren't expected to say anything, right? When mom and dad's grown-up friends came around, you could be there, but only if you shut up, right? If you tried entering into the conversation, you'd be sent upstairs to play or do something, but you're not going to be there. So that's changed a lot. Different one would be, well, dad's rule is law. Dad's word is law. Right? You don't argue with your father. Right? That's not appropriate. You're a child. Right? We don't negotiate. I tell you what to do, and you do it. You might even hear things like this. When you're no longer living in my house, then you can do what you like, but as long as you're living in my house and I'm paying for you, blah, 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 you'll fly. Right? Now consider that with a different one. So I would say that's not psychologically well suited. You're not if that's how you're bringing up children, they're not going to be psychologically well suited to live in liberal democracies. Why? Well, because you're bringing up little authoritarians, right? People who think that, right, this is the way to do it. How should you do it? And I think parents are experiencing a real a lot of shock about this. It's hard to get around. Children are already, even when they're small, able to negotiate and discuss and to a limited extent understand the reasons why they should do what they do. They're not to be hit, told to shut up, put in a room, or brutalized in this way and told that they can't do things. They're to be talked to. They're to have things explained to them in the way that they can understand to the degree that they can. Oh, sure, there's room for timeouts, and you have to go to your room, and no, you may not. But the difference is you're expecting children to grow up to be autonomous negotiators in a world that recognizes them as such. By the way, on this one, the difference between classes is enormous. There have been a lot of studies of this. So if you're the child of working class parents, you will still be brought up on much closer to the model that I was brought up on, with closure, authority, so on. With far more. Parents have a role to play in your life, but they don't micromanage it. They're not endlessly arranging play dates for you. They're not doing any of that stuff. They're not thinking about what, elementary school you should go to. They're not thinking about how to get you into college. They're not doing all of that. They think, no, you feed one end, you wipe the other, you let them play on the street, they go to school, that's what schools are for, and then they graduate from school and they get a job, or whatever, right? But if you belong to a different class, then you will have parents that are much more on that other end, endlessly worrying about what's going to happen if they, right? More helicopterish parents, right, will appear at the other end, making sure that every aspect of your life helps you to be successful in their terms of success. So if it's a liberal democratic terms of success, all the way along all of our school institutions will be set up to encourage the cast of mind of a successful liberal democrat. Right, so the thought will be, you won't accept certain kinds of authority. You'll question them. You'll think they're open to evidence and arguments. You'll do a whole set of, you'll think that, oh no, we should be tolerant. People have different religions, different general views. The way the society should be tolerant of that. You won't be inclined to be tolerant of intolerance of that. You'll think that's not successfully understanding the name of the game. There are paradoxes of liberalism, but actually I think most of them are really shallow. Because the thought is not, what happens when you've got Nazis in a liberal society and they don't agree to the liberal society? Aren't you just going to, by letting them do what they want, aren't you just undercutting your own? No, I think that liberal democracy is totalizing. It says, you're entitled to have some views, yes, but you're not entitled to undercut the general structure of liberal democracy. I'm sorry. If what you want to do is to turn us into a Nazi society, we're going to stop you. You can hold those ridiculous ideological views if you want, but if you try to put them into practice and utilize them to get all of us to do it, then we'll stop you. Why? Well, because we've already decided that liberal democracy is the best form of social work. So given that, we would absolutely not accept any of the others. Okay, so you see how it would go, right? We'd be thinking about how to develop this in such a way as to be successfully integratable into the psychology of a grown-up who is having a successful life in that kind of social world. So you can cut that, that's the picture you have to have in mind. I say that's the dimension of the whole issue. Right? And then you have to ask a different, further question, which we can kind of just gesture at. How do you integrate that into a natural world in such a way as to be sustainable with long-term goals? Now, we face this problem dramatically because our way of life is not integratable into the natural world for a long term. We obviously can't continue to use up fossil fuels and heat up the planet and do all kinds of things just forever, right? So that's got another question. Okay. See with me? All right. Now, now suppose we accept this picture, and I think lots of political thinkers, certainly, the classical ones, Plato, Aristotle, Kant, accept a picture like this, even if it's backgrounded. So even when it's not put on the page, if you dig in, you find there's a kind of background picture. And I think all of these have written into them the notion of closure. And why? Well, look, I just told you. We get here and then we don't go anywhere else. Right? So let's look at Marx. There'll be the revolution of the proletariat. And then what? End of history. That's nice. Oh, I don't mean stuff will stop happening. It's just there won't be any interesting story to it anymore. There won't be any further development. No more character and plot. There'll be repetition because we've now reached the stage at which we're all developing our capacities to the full, and then revolution will be over. There won't be any history. There'll be no further development of the means of production because they'll be fully developed. And there will be no oppression. And it'll be a kind of heaven on earth. It's closure. You've probably read it. I can't remember this guy's Fukuyama or something like that. The last man, the end of history. This stuff is all over the place. But what I want to do is, right? You can see how you get there, right? You can see the thoughts about what it is. And if you close down on any one of the elements, you sort of auto-generate the others to fit in with you. If you think, oh, there is a really normal, by nature, best psychological development, then you think, oh, the best social world is one that allows you to do that. You can do it whichever way you want. Heaven is the final picture of this, right? So what happens in heaven? Well, we know the talking heads tell us what happens in heaven. This same thing happens over and over again. Right? When the kiss is over, it will start again. It won't be any different. It will be exactly the same. Right? So the thought about heaven is that thought. It's the closure thought. Then the game's over, right? The last trump sound. Blah, 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 blah. The sheep and the goats are separated once and for all. And then what? And then that. Though. Endlessly repeating. So that's closure. Yeah.
So closed and then ideal. Closed is bad.
We haven't gotten there yet.
We will know that. Okay, I think. But okay.
Heaven is bad?
No, that's exactly my.
Yeah.
But then you're trying to get to the ideal, and you're never ever able to get there. So you.
Why not?
Because it's ideal.
Oh, well, no, that's not bad. No,
Is
that's terrible. No,
so
why? And you'd have to tell a further story. I mean, if ideal means what can't be realized, then don't call it the ideal. Just call it something else. The achievable ideal, right? Or the achievable goal. There's nothing, you can't get it by a little semantic thing about ideals. What you have to do is say, no, the point is you can get, so call it a sweet spot. It doesn't have to be a point. Call it a little area. You can move around within them, but you just don't come out of it, right? You get close enough, in other words. And of course, in heaven, you get absolutely close. You hit it. Yeah. And Kant, right? You can't get it anywhere else. Right? The kingdom of ends is possible only with a numinal ruler. On earth, out of the crooked timber of humanity, nothing straight was ever made. You want straight? Nobody wants that. But if you wanted it, the only way to get it is God comes and says, okay, I'll rule. Right? Then it'll be fine. And that's what we're projecting when we tell a story like this. Okay, so now where am I going? Well, remember I told you last time, I know you didn't get it, because I barely got it myself. But I wanted to say, don't geometricize things, don't think of concepts as these little frozen pieces of things, think of them as little animals, And you were thinking, what? Okay. So let me try to, tell you now what I was doing. So there is something wrong with closure, and we need to be able to tell ourselves, right? It's not that we can't reach it; it's that we shouldn't want to reach it. Everything that Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and the anti-closure people have tried to tell us is, look, I'll tell you how to reach closure. Die! That's closure. You don't have to worry about any new stuff happening after that. Reach the end, bang, and that's it. It's done. So there's something wrong with closure. And what we need to do is to explore better what's wrong with it. So both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche say it would be boring. And that's open to us to respond. No, it wouldn't. Right?
Let me prove it.
A lot of, psychologists. Oh yeah, but the same old, right? So remember the Talking Heads again. The band that plays in heaven plays my favorite song. Plays it once again. It plays it all night long. Well, I don't know. I'm sure you've had this with favorite songs. At least for quite a long time. You can play them over and over. They're just great. Eventually, you probably never want to hear them again. But still, though, there was think if the song was so great that you just never got tired of listening to it, right? Why wouldn't you just want it over and over again? What is this boredom stuff? Or think of Aristotle. It's just because you're thinking like a human. Try thinking like a god, right? Don't worry about all those, emotives and things that pull you around. Just think, imagine if you're just pure. It would be groovy, right? And I think that that's the trouble, in a sense, is to say, you can stamp your foot. You can say, it would be great, and I say, no, it would be boring, and then we just get a face-off. So I want to try to prevent the face-off, because those are bad in philosophy. I was just one screaming on another. We want a different picture. And I want to introduce some ideas to get us there. So I want to look into reason and say, well, we're offered a model of closure for reason. And it's the closure of reason that results in all of this closure. That says, you see, there is a way to get it all right. And what I want to do is first look at the alleged closure of reason itself. Well, one of the things we know, this is the first passage, nothing that we know suggests that reason is closed. So, in fact, all of the models of closure were blown up in the early part of the 20th century. Models of closure like the great Hilbert mathematization process, which is going to result in the final reduction of all of mathematics to logic that was provably consistent, complete. That just evaporated with good. Right? I just couldn't do it. And every single really great advance since then has been to do it more. So, for example, we've explored things like this. Computable in ideally computable, but not really computable. So functions that are ideally computable, we know that they can be computed, but we also know that they can't be computed in the available time of the universe or with the number of particles there are in the universe to build your computer. So we've done a lot of stuff in theoretical, this is, if you like, algorithm studies. Can you program? Can you close? Or is there a software that will do it? Answer, well, we can study all kinds of issues in software and in these kinds of programs, and what we've discovered is even very simple ones can't be shown to be consistent and complete. So that's an interesting fact. I want to hold on to it because I think sometimes in talking about logic and reason, people have forgotten that actually major advances led us to abandon a picture of reason, and even in mathematics, that was dominant right up to the 19th century. So just in today in ethics, we were reading the opening sentence of the fundamental groundwork of the metaphysics of morals. It's the pages before your mind clicks in, it's like, well, today is the part where you think, oh, we're just getting there, nothing is happening. Everything is, of course, happening, right? And one of the things that you see there is that Kant supposes that the laws of nature are closed, that Newton discovered them and that's finished. And the laws of logic are closed. Aristotle discovered them, and that's finished. And so now he's able to use those two closures, right, to do a lot of those philosophical work from him. Neither of those things is true. That's one way, but I want to look at a different picture altogether. I want to look at, in the rational, the notion of the genius. So when we think about reason, we too readily think of it in terms of the predictable, the computational, the closed, the algorithmic, the software. But we also recognize, when we look at the history of reason, the history of developments in reason, that what we see are these great peaks of genius. So, you know, we think of in music, you think of Mozart, Beethoven. We think of in literature, Shakespeare, Goethe. People that just seem to be of a different order of magnitude altogether. They just don't look like anything. And the more you study their works, Plato is another, of course, the more you study their works, you think. And in fact, when the early Renaissance, no, not the one that the famous one, but the 12th century Renaissance, in which St. Thomas started to Christianize Aristotle, many people believed that Plato and Aristotle must have been semi-divine beings. Why? Well, because nothing as complex as their collected works otherwise existed. And they thought, well, we couldn't do this. They must have been, and they were like ages ago, right? That's the thought, is that they're sort of qualitative difference. So when we look at the genius, right, we think not this way, right? We don't think of the slow development of kind of plotting. We think of the explosive new insights, the changing around of everything, the finding of new paradigms, the creativity, and that's the other notion I want to put in. And we think of now as our models, not so much of, though we can stick with science because we've got plenty of them there, but we also tend to think of art. We think of places where some people just do something entirely new and show you new kinds of ways of looking at the world, new kinds of beauty, new kinds of things that were just seem like there's an absolute break, so to speak, between them and the past. You couldn't have predicted it. Only in hindsight can you see all those kinds of things. Now, genius and creativity are much underexplored, and they're very poorly understood, in fact. But the Romantics were fascinated by it, for obvious kinds of reasons. They wouldn't have been Romantics if they hadn't been fascinated by the romantic figure, right? The figure of the genius who, right, could do just all of these magical things. And when you think of someone like Leibniz, right, the last person to know everything, I mean, Leibniz really was, man. I think the most sobering thing to do as a confinement, go to the library, find Leibniz, and then see his History of the House of Hanover in 13 volumes. I mean, it's staggering, right? Or Mill, you know, anyway, I could go on. But the point is, the poor guy had to write that to earn a living so that he could think. It's like, you know, well, I won't say what it's like. It's like grading certain kinds of paper. Okay, so anyway, genius and creativity suggest a different picture of reason. Not the ones that you guys write, okay? Different ones. Genius and creativity give us a different picture. And it's that picture that I want to hold on to. I want to say, right, that going along with closure, right, goes thoughts that are inimical to giving a good understanding of those, and one more thing. And this is the really big one. As soon as you see it, you realize what an absurd prejudice it is, but how persistent it is. The future. everyone supposes that the ideal society that we're making is an ideal one for beings whose psychology we understand. Indeed, beings whose psychology we have, because we are them. Think instead of the last of the Mohicans. Imagine that you're a Mohican, and you're not at the last yet, but you're thinking of the future as being a Mohican future, right? The way we live is the way Mohicans live. And then you encounter a moment, the moment at which you realize there will be no more Mohicans. You're the last. There was a great book about this by Jonathan Lear called Radical Hope. I don't know if anyone has read it. It's a stunning short book. And it's not about the last of the Mohicans, it's about it's about another Indian tribe, okay? It's not so far away. I just thought you'd all know about the last of the damn Mohicans. This is about I think it's a Sioux, I'm not sure. The last chief, Plentycoo, and he was still alive. And Lear interviewed him and talked about what it is to confront the end of your civilization. So it's not this, that one day it will end. It's that there, right there is the end. Now think of blue-collar workers in the mid-states in America. A big part of what's going on, right, is they're confronting the end of a world. Their world is finished. That there won't be that kind of world anymore. And it's very hard to face the fact that not only are you going to die, but your way of life is going to die too. It's finished. A way that you loved, a way that we look back at it. When I was a kid, there were blacksmiths. Where did they all go? Right? And there were people who made coopers, people who made barrels for beer. Right? Where did they all go? Answer: well, there were fletchers and bowmakers and all kinds of things. Trades by the hundreds and thousands, all of which have disappeared. And many of the ones that we know have disappeared too. Worse, we will disappear. We're not the end of anything, right? That's the biggest, hardest bullet to try to absorb and theorize that we get from Darwin. It's the part that we have to stop thinking that the future we're preparing for is a human future. There's nothing to tell us, to assure us that it's going to be that. So, for example, when we start to think this way, we lose the notion of the fixed points that gave us this kind of notion of closure. So, for example, let me just imagine with you for a second. Right? Well, we have this little black thing, right? This little thing that grows up in a certain way, the reproduction urge. Well, we're already being told that we're nearly eternal, right? Soon we could, live to be 500, like the patriarchs in the Bible. Right? Nothing, biology could get us till we really could stay around forever. We're going to keep reproducing.